is it possible to maintain an equilibrium between the noble values of the past with modernity?
I think the answer to your question is that you can preserve the noble values of the past, but they should be subject to re-evaluation all the time. And take for example, family values. It is a great strength of Asian societies that they pay such a high premium on taking care of their families. And that explains why, for example, many Asian societies are able to provide, in a sense, an inherent social safety net. The state doesn't provide a safety net, but the family structure provides a safety net. So in that sense, that's positive. But, there are always two sides of the same coin. And on the other side of the same coin of family values, you have the danger of nepotism. And the biggest danger that Asian societies face is that whenever someone succeeds and develops in any Asian society, he has a very strong impulse to bring his uncle in, his cousin in, his brother-in-law into the position of power. Now, if they get this position on the basis of merit, that's not a problem. But if they get it on the basis of connections, that's a real problem. And that's why I think one fundamental principle that all Asian societies should implement is the principle of meritocracy. Because if you put in the principle of meritocracy and you ensure that the person selected for the job is the best possible person and not because he's your uncle or cousin, that means that you can develop.
And not very many countries are on that stage yet.
Well, it is actually surprising. One of the most surprising examples is China. As you know, China is still run by the Chinese Communist Party. And the old Communist Party impulse was always to keep the power within the party and allow only the most senior people to exercise control. And that's why, as you know, the Soviet Communist Party used to have leaders where the average age was 75 or 80 years old, and they would stay in office right to the time when they die. But you look at China today, China is one of the youngest set of leaders of any country in the world. And China believes that unless you have a process of renewal of the leadership, China will go downhill again. And I always say that the Chinese Communist Party did not have to reinvent the wheel for doing that. They looked at successful organizations in the West, and I always compare the Chinese method of selecting its leaders to Harvard University. In Harvard University, before they appoint a professor to any post, they first try and find out who's the number one person in the field, number two person in the field, number three person in the field. And you have to be either number one or number two or number three person before you can become a professor in Harvard University. And if you're not in that league, they don't want to fill that position. So in the same way, China, you notice when they select the mayors, vice mayors, ministers and all that, they try and pick the best possible candidate. And if you can inject the talent into your leadership positions, that's how you renew societies.
But Asia, collectively, we have countries rising like China, India, countries developed like Japan. But we have these different levels of development. Will they lag behind?
Oh, some countries will lag behind. I think North Korea will clearly lag behind. I also worry for Myanmar. I think Myanmar will lag behind. But the good news for Asian societies is that, enough Asian societies have succeeded. Japan has succeeded, Korea has succeeded, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Four Tigers have succeeded. Now China is succeeding, and then India is succeeding. So there is enough momentum. And what we, especially at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, it's, our students come from all over Asia. Only 20% of our students come from Singapore. What we want to encourage our students, most of them come from Asia, why don't you just study what the successful neighbors are doing? Why don't you just copy your neighbor? This is what, for example, China did in the early years. I mean, China asked itself the obvious question: why are the Chinese in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore doing so well when the Chinese in China are so poor? I said, okay, they implemented free market economics. We will have free market economics
That's what they
in
did.
China too. And as you know, the Chinese have bit the bullet, and they are prepared to get rid of state monopolies, get rid of inefficient state-owned enterprises, and that's what the societies need to do. I mean, in 1950, Philippines was seen to have a great future, and China was seen to have no future. Today, China is taking off, and Philippines is still lagging behind. So I would say, learn from the successful societies and implement them as fast as you can.
Well, ASEAN is talking about establishing the East Asian community. I mean, will that work to kind of level or at least bring a semblance of a balance, let's say, between the countries?
To answer your question, I'm very optimistic about the prospects for an East Asian community, because while Asian societies have not perfectly implemented many of the best practices of the West, they realize that in some ways the West has reached the greatest peak of human civilization by not just achieving zero wars between any two Western states. They've also achieved zero prospect of war. I mean, it's amazing. The Europeans have been fighting each other for centuries, and today there's zero prospect of war within France and Germany, France and UK, America and Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Now, this explains why these societies have developed and can grow and succeed. In the same way, the Asian societies have gone one step towards that direction by achieving zero wars. And today you have no wars or no prospect of wars even among most of the major Asian states. And that's a remarkable achievement. And I don't think it's happened by accident. I think it's a result of a conscious decision on the part of the Asian leaders. If they go to war with each other, they will destroy their chances. They will waste another century in trying to catch up with their West. And so I think the fundamental impulse behind the East Asian community is to create a cooperative climate. So even though the economic cooperation may not grow so fast, as you know, the Asians take too long to implement free trade agreements because they have a lot of vested domestic interests that prevent them from establishing real free trade agreements. But at least on the political front and the military front, the growing stability is a huge asset. So I see great prospects ahead for the East Asian community.
Well, let's hope you're right. There's a lot of pessimism about it, but like you, there's a lot of optimism.